Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Bob the Booker, and today I wanted to go over some of the books that I read this week, which I'm now managing to knock over as I'm talking. But it's been quite a fun reading week, and here are the five that I will be talking about. But they've been really interesting in quite a broad variety of ways. So let's get stuck in. And let's sort of start with one that I really loved, which is The Roles We Play by Sabba, which is a graphic novel and recently won the Jalak Prize. I promise I don't only read prize books, but this one particularly caught my interest. And I also was looking for a nice graphic novel read anyhow. So this, I mean, it's beautifully done in terms of the artwork. Oh, that was a really good random page to pick a page to pick at random. But yeah, just sort of really beautiful style, quite minimalist, but also really quite expressive. Yeah, I just thought it was just such an interesting book. It talks a lot about her identity, and particularly her sort of at the crossroads of her sort of family's expectations of who she'll be, in terms of sort of cultural traditions and religion and various other things, but also what that looks like being in the UK and in a couple of other countries in Europe as well. I thought this was just really profound and really beautiful. She talks, for example, a lot about her conversations with herself, essentially about wearing the hijab, and so, for example, not wearing it feels like a really active choice as much as wearing it feels like a really active choice. And so both of them communicate something, right? She talks about how when she doesn't wear it, she sort of suddenly feels like she's lost this sense of communion with other people who wear it. So walking around seeing sort of hijabi sisters essentially, and kind of thinking like, I used to be able to look across a room and nod at you and we kind of got each other, but also by not wearing it, I have these other sort of associations and these other things that I'm sort of feeling. And yeah, really interesting. And I thought really beautifully done in terms of this. I mean, a really well drawn and illustrated graphic novel, and her identity as well. Next up, I read Matrix by Groff, and I've been meaning to read this for a really long time. I have had this, I think, pretty much since just before it came out, because I think Eric Carl Anderson gave me a copy ages ago, and it took me this long to kind of come around and reading it, and it's now come out in paperback anyway. But I thought this was just a really fun and interesting book. It sort of largely really focuses around nuns, and sort of in the, I think, 1100s, 12th century nuns, so 1100s, and I just really enjoyed this. I just thought it captured the voice of it particularly well, of that era. I say that having not been around then, because, you know, not sure if that's a surprise to anyone that I'm not, 900 years old. But I thought this was just really beautifully done and really funny. I'm slowly coming round to really enjoying books that have a sort of court drama aspect of it, the sort of court politics of the time. I'm finding quite interesting, and I think I listened to part of this as an audiobook as well, and Ajoa Ando does the audiobook, and she's one of those people who basically 9 times out of 10, if I'm listening to an audiobook and I'm like, ooh, this is really good, who is this? 9 times out of 10, it's Ajoa Ando. And so I really enjoyed how she captured this here, not only the accents, but also the sort of the really high and low kind of ways that people spoke, right? The kind of the court voice and then the kind of interpersonal voice. Really fun, very descriptive in a really beautiful way that I just thought was really interesting, and really funny at times. It's a book about sort of 12th century nuns doesn't immediately sound like it's going to be particularly funny, at least not in a kind of, without it being in like kind of a carry-on sort of sense. But this I thought was so well handled, and I just really enjoyed it. I see what the buzz was about now, a year later. Very slow on catching on with this, but really well played and really well done, I thought, as a book. Next, I'm still on my Booker nonsense in many ways. This is a book that I've been meaning to get back to the library for a while. Quartet in Autumn by Barbara Pym. This is a book that largely sort of follows a cast of sort of older characters. They've sort of just recently retired or kind of quit their jobs, which feels very, very timely to be listening to right now, given Beyonce's recent song, sort of releasing your job. They do that. Very different worlds to Beyonce, however. And what I think is, so I had quite mixed feelings about this book. Overall, really enjoyed the sort of humour of it. It's very, that kind of very specific older British humour of this sort of very cutting middle class sort of absurdity, kind of Muriel Sparks style, but a little bit upper class and very sort of biting. And I did really enjoy that, and there are some incredible put downs in this book where characters sort of will say something, and again that sort of Maggie Smith quality to the book of just sort of like, oh right, you're doing that, okay, well that's a choice. So I did really enjoy that. I think parts of it did feel a bit dated, and there were some parts of the plot where I wasn't fully, you know, I wasn't fully bought in to it, because I think sort of the characters sort of mostly seemed to live quite similar lives at times, and so I sort of sometimes found it a bit hard to kind of keep up with some of those bits and who was who, but at the same time just really good fun. It's just a nice pleasurable read. As much as the characters aren't always that nice or likable, there's a real likability to the tone of the book. It's just, I mean, it's very snarky and sneering, but it's also just quite funny. These people are being mocked quite mercilessly, but yeah, really fun. apart from all the mocking, really quite nice. But yeah, I did have some issues with the book, but I'm keen to read more Barbara Pym, because I get the feeling she's the kind of novelist who I'd really quite enjoy for that very specific type of British humour. So yeah, I'm definitely going to check out more as well. And this was shortlisted for the Booker, I think 77, 78. Yeah, it was sometime in the 70s as well. So I'll be talking about it again when I come around to that shortlist. But yeah, really interesting book nonetheless. So when I'm not talking about the Booker, evidently I talk about other book prizes. And the Wainwright Prize has recently given its long list and is about to do its shortlist. And Wildfell is one that is a book I'd been wanting to read anyhow a bit before, but then saw it on the Wainwright Prize and thought, okay, now's the time. So this book by Lee Schofield is essentially talking about conservation of nature, and particularly how we can redesign our landscapes, particularly various types of farming, in a way that is really regenerative for nature, but also supports local traditions, supports incomes for farmers, supports various other things. So this is a non-fiction book, but that really, in many ways, tells a proper narrative. We watch as the author struggles with people who are quite against a lot of his plans. So many of the farmers are scared that he is sort of coming to basically take away their sheep and to take away their livelihoods. He makes the case that actually reducing the number of sheep overall, or reducing reliance on sheep, is actually more cost effective and helps the land and helps the soil and helps income and all these various other things. But there's also a really fascinating and beautiful passage where he goes to Norway for a bit, and we watch how he is in a landscape that's been largely left alone, and how many wildflowers and wild plants have had a chance to grow. So it's sort of like watching, almost like Sliding Doors as a film, right? Like, here's the choice that the UK has taken in various parts of its farming. Here's the choice that's sort of happened in various parts of Norway, where it's been a lot more left alone. And now let's compare the two and see actually how these two things have functioned very differently as a result. So I found this book really important, both in terms of what it has to say about conservation and about nature more generally, but also just really fun, like really engaging to hear about nature in such a beautiful, powerful way. And I think there's a real love and passion for nature that creeps through in this book. So I really genuinely loved this book, and really hope, this is my second 5-star of the week after the graphic novel, and I really hope that this makes it to the next, to the shortlist for the Wainwright as well. I am planning on reading the shortlists for the Wainwright, the children's one less so, just because I don't have as much interest in children's lit just generally, but I'm up for reading some of it. But also the conservation and nature writing prizes. Most of my favourite non-fiction books from last year were from the Wainwright Prize, so I'm really hoping to kind of repeat that this year, and I feel like this is already one of the front runners for me for one of my favourite non-fiction books for the year. And last but not least, a book that I've been wanting to read for a little bit, The Seep by Chana Porter. And this book I just thought is such an interesting, in many ways feels a bit off the beaten path what I might normally read, but has sort of enticed me in kind of an interesting way. So I've been realising recently that I do enjoy sci-fi and fantasy when I actually sit down and read it. I don't do it that often, but The Seep sort of has been like a sort of bridge sort of straddling the two. So essentially, long story short, The Seep is a sort of alien not necessarily mind control, but kind of it almost appears in the book as sort of like a drug. So if you think of something like Brave New World with the drug Soma, I think it is, which is the drug that just makes everybody feel really happy with no real side effects. The Seep is sort of like that, where people sort of might drink things or bake Seep into things and take it in that sense, and it basically just makes people feel happier. They're a little bit looser with their emotions. It almost plays the role of alcohol in that sort of sense, but has no real major side effects, at least that they see at first. And there's this really interesting thing about people who sort of take a lot of Seep can change their bodies, and this is where a really sort of interesting queer angle comes in, because a few of the central characters are trans, and so the ability to morph and shape your body however you might see fit is obviously quite appealing to people who maybe are experiencing gender dysphoria. And so I think this book does some really clever things with taking those ideas of sort of speculative fiction or science fiction and putting them through a very queer lens of actually how would this look for a trans character existing in this world. But then there's some also really interesting bits within this as well about, there's a whole scene around a character who wants to become a baby and sort of transform their body into that of a baby. And obviously that is very, very different. That is a particularly interesting one in terms of relationships. Like, how does that play in if you're in a relationship with someone and they suddenly decide to become a baby? What does that do? That's a bit of a strange relationship now. And one thing that I thought was particularly interesting and really funny within the book on this is it has a pamphlet. Like, pamphlets are sort of like living, breathing things. They sort of can respond. You can have a conversation with a pamphlet. And one of the pamphlets is called "So Your Partner's Decided to Become a Baby." It's so like it's such a brilliant spoof of those sort of really 80s parodies, and it's particularly the ones 80s pamphlets, and particularly the ones you see in like The Simpsons of like, so you've decided to ruin your life, and so it's just really well done. So I really quite enjoyed this. I thought it was a really fun but really quick to read. So it's about 200 or so pages, but actually there's a lot of space between the text and fairly big font. So yeah, just really interesting, and it's on Scribd, and you can find it on things like that in the audiobook version as well. So yeah, I'm just kind of really keen to read sort of other things like this, really, and sort of feel like I'm slowly entering a phase where I'm a little bit more comfortable with the idea of reading sci-fi or fantasy, and particularly slightly more escapist reading as well. But yeah, really fun things. But anyway, those have been the books that I've read this week. These 5 books all sort of tumbled together, and I've just really greatly enjoyed it. I think this has been a really fun reading week. The graphic novel particularly, and a bit of nature writing particularly helping in what's been a week of me being incredibly worn out and tired, but also where 2 days of this week were a heat wave in the UK, which I somehow just about survived, and really was knocked sideways by. I'm not good in the heat, as you probably already know. Or could probably just guess by how tired I just am by general life. But yeah, here are the sort of 5 books that I've read, and these were all quite nice escapist ones. And this is the last sort of weekly wrap-up before we go into booker season as well. So very soon my weekly wrap-ups are probably going to be fairly heavily booker weighted. So here is some sort of fairly normal reading before that all happens. Anyway, I hope you've had a good week. I hope you've not melted too much, particularly if you're in Europe, where it's been hitting hardest. I've been Bob the Booker. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.